My brother stole my ATM card and drained the savings I had set aside for my engagement party. When I confronted him, my father slapped me across the face in front of the entire family, calling me a liar. Shaken and humiliated, I quietly dialed my fiancé, and the moment he stepped through the door, the room fell into stunned silence. My name is Rachel Morgan, and if you had met me a year ago, you would have seen a woman who thought she had everything under control. At 27, I was living in Chicago, working as an event planner, building my career, and saving every dollar I could for a very special day, my engagement party. For months, I kept imagining the evening, the people I loved gathered together, the music I would choose, the food that would taste just right, and the smile on my fiancé's face when he saw the celebration I had created for us. His name is Daniel Carter. He's 29, a software engineer, and the person who has been my anchor in every storm. Life with him felt steady, safe, and full of promise. I lived with my father, Thomas Morgan, and my younger brother, Ethan. My father was 55 and had retired early from construction after an accident at work left him with chronic pain. He had always been a strong man, proud of his labor and the years he put into providing for us. But since his retirement, he spent most days at home, sitting in his recliner, watching television, or tinkering with small repairs around the house. My brother Ethan was 24, a college student, though student might be too generous a word. He was smart, yes, but he lacked focus. He skipped classes, wasted time with friends, and constantly looked for shortcuts in life. Everyone in the family knew Ethan was irresponsible, but my father had this blind spot for him. No matter what Ethan did, Dad defended him, as if protecting him would somehow fix all his flaws. I was the responsible one, the one who kept things steady. I worked long hours, paid my share of bills, and contributed to keeping our home running smoothly. I didn't resent it, I just accepted that it was my role. I believed my father respected me for it, though deep down, I always felt his attention and affection tilted toward Ethan. Still, I carried on, thinking that once I married Daniel, life would shift into a new chapter. I had been saving for months, putting aside money into a separate account meant only for my engagement party. It wasn't just about decorations or food. It was about creating a night that reflected all the love Daniel and I shared. Every time I made a deposit, I felt proud. I was building something meaningful. That money represented my effort, my dedication, and my dreams. Then came the morning when my world tilted. I woke up and went through my usual routine, coffee, emails, and a quick check of my bank account to reassure myself that everything was on track. My heart stopped when I saw the balance. Almost everything was gone. My savings, months of hard work and sacrifice had been drained. At first, I thought there must be a mistake, some technical glitch. But the longer I stared at the screen, the clearer it became. The money was gone. I tore through my things, looking for my ATM card. I always kept it tucked away in my wallet, never careless with it. But it wasn't there. A chill went through me. I thought about who had access, who could have taken it. My suspicion landed almost immediately on Ethan. He had been acting strangely, avoiding eye contact, disappearing for hours without explanation. I remembered the way he had laughed off his money troubles just a week earlier, joking about how he wished he had a magic card that could pay for everything. At the time, I dismissed it as one of his careless remarks. Now it felt like a confession I had missed. I confronted him that afternoon. He was in the living room, stretched out on the couch with his phone. "Ethan," I said, trying to keep my voice steady, "my savings are gone. The money for my engagement party. Do you know anything about it?" He didn't even look up at first. Then he smirked, this sly, infuriating smile. "Why would I know anything about your money?" he asked, his tone dripping with mock innocence. "You've been acting different lately. And my card is missing. Tell me the truth." He shrugged. "You're always so paranoid, Rachel. Maybe you misplaced it. Maybe you spent more than you thought." Anger bubbled inside me. "Don't lie to me. That money was everything to me." But he just kept that smug smile, the kind of look that told me he wasn't going to admit anything, not when he thought he could get away with it. I went to my father next, hoping for support, hoping he would finally hold Ethan accountable. Dad was sitting in his recliner, the TV flickering across his face. I told him everything, my voice shaking but firm. Dad, Ethan stole from me. He took my card. He drained my savings. I know it was him. Dad turned his head slowly, his eyes narrowing. Rachel, don't start with this nonsense. Your brother would never do something like that. He would, and he did. You don't want to see it, but it's true. Enough. His voice was sharp, filled with authority I hadn't heard in years. You're blaming him because you can't keep track of your own money. Stop trying to cause trouble in this house. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Dad, please just listen to me. I wouldn't accuse him without reason. He's been lying. He's been hiding something. That's when it happened. The slap. His hand came across my face, so fast I barely saw it coming. The sting burned, not just on my skin but deep in my chest. I stood frozen, my heart pounding, humiliated and betrayed in the worst way. Ethan was still on the couch, and when I turned my head, I saw him smiling. Not a big smile, but enough to tell me he was enjoying my pain. I wanted to scream, to collapse, to run, but instead I walked away. My cheeks were hot, my throat tight, but my mind was already racing. I couldn't let it end like this. I couldn't let him win. That night, when the house was quiet, I made my decision. If no one believed me, I would gather proof. I went to the bank the next morning, sat across from a clerk, and explained what happened. They printed out detailed statements, line after line of withdrawals from ATMs across the city. Each transaction lined up with the days Ethan had disappeared for hours. The amounts matched the missing funds almost to the dollar. Holding those papers in my hands, I felt a strange mixture of grief and determination. My brother had stolen from me, and my father had chosen him over me. But I wasn't powerless. I had the truth, and I would use it. I tucked the statements into my bag and waited. I didn't know exactly how I would reveal them, but I knew I had to. I couldn't allow Ethan's smirk or my father's blindness to erase what had been done. Something inside me had shifted. I wasn't just the responsible daughter anymore, the one who quietly carried the weight of the family. I was someone who had been wronged, and I wasn't going to stay silent. And though I didn't yet know how, I felt in my bones that the next family gathering would change everything. The days after I collected those bank statements felt heavy, like I was carrying a secret that burned in my chest every time I looked at Ethan. He strutted around the house like nothing had happened, whistling to himself, tapping on his phone, going out late and coming back smelling of alcohol and cigarettes. My father continued treating him like the golden son, while with me there was only silence. He wouldn't meet my eyes, and when he did, there was that cold disappointment in his gaze, as if I had wronged Ethan instead of the other way around. At work, I forced myself to focus on my clients and their events, but even as I helped brides pick flowers or walked through venues, my mind kept circling back to the betrayal inside my own home. Every phone call with Daniel was like a lifeline. He didn't push me for details when I wasn't ready, but his voice carried steady reassurance. He told me he trusted me, that he believed me, and those words gave me strength. I didn't want to burden him with every detail yet. Part of me wanted to handle it myself, to stand tall when the truth came out, but deep down, I was also terrified. When the weekend approached, I knew I couldn't keep the truth hidden much longer. We always had family dinners on Sundays, and I decided that would be the moment. I rehearsed in my head how I would lay the papers on the table, how I would speak without trembling. I didn't want to scream or cry. I wanted to be calm, steady, undeniable. That Sunday, I arrived home early, carrying the bank statements folded neatly in my bag. The house smelled like roasted chicken, garlic, and Dad's favorite potatoes. The table was set, and for a fleeting moment, it looked like any other family dinner. Ethan was already there, lounging in his chair with a smug grin. Dad was pouring himself a glass of iced tea. Then Daniel walked in, placing a gentle hand on my shoulder, and I felt a surge of courage. We started eating. The first 20 minutes were filled with casual conversation, Dad talking about a neighbor's new car, Ethan cracking jokes that made him laugh louder than anyone else, Daniel politely answering questions about his work. I barely touched my food. My hands trembled under the table, my heart beating so hard I thought they would hear it. Finally, I couldn't wait anymore. I reached into my bag and pulled out the papers. I laid them flat on the table, right between the mashed potatoes and the basket of bread. "What's this?" Dad asked, his voice carrying mild irritation, like I was interrupting something important. "These are the bank statements," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "They show every withdrawal from my account, every time money was taken. And if you look closely, you'll see the dates and times match perfectly with when Ethan disappeared from the house." Ethan shifted in his chair, his grin faltering. Dad frowned, leaning closer to the pages, scanning them without really wanting to see. I pointed to the lines one by one. "Here's a withdrawal downtown at midnight. Ethan was gone that night. Here's another at the gas station ATM near campus. The same day, he claimed he was studying at home. It's all here, Dad. This isn't my imagination. This isn't paranoia. It's proof." The room went silent. The only sound was the faint hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen. My father's jaw tightened. Ethan's face paled, and the smirk he always wore slipped away completely. He didn't dare look at me. Daniel spoke next, his voice calm but firm. "Thomas, you can't ignore this. Rachel's done everything to show the truth. This isn't just about money, it's about trust. Ethan betrayed her, and pretending otherwise will only make things worse." For the first time, my father looked uncertain. His hand rested on the edge of the table, gripping it as if to steady himself. His eyes moved from the papers to Ethan. "Tell me this isn't true," he said, his voice low. Ethan opened his mouth, but no words came. He swallowed hard, glancing from me to Dad, searching for the defense that had always been there. But the evidence spoke louder than anything he could say. "You think you're so clever," Ethan finally muttered, his tone sharp, though it wavered with fear. "Digging through my business, making me out to be some kind of criminal. You've always hated me, Rachel. You'd do anything to ruin me." I leaned forward. "I don't have to ruin you, Ethan. You did that yourself. I only showed the truth." Daniel placed his hand over mine, steady and supportive. Then he turned to my father. "We can't let this slide. Rachel worked for months to save that money, and Ethan took it without remorse. There have to be consequences." My father sat back in his chair, his face pale. For the first time in years, I saw doubt in his eyes, a crack in the blind loyalty that had always shielded Ethan. But before he could respond, I made the choice for him. "I'm done waiting for someone else to protect me," I said, my voice trembling with both fear and power. "If you won't take action, Dad, then I will. Daniel and I will go to the police with this." Ethan shot up from his chair, his face red. "You wouldn't dare." Daniel stood too, taller, stronger, his presence filling the room. "She doesn't have to dare. She will. And I'll be standing beside her when she does." The tension in the room was unbearable. My father lowered his eyes, defeated, while Ethan's fury burned across his face. But beneath his anger, I saw fear. For once, he realized his lies and arrogance couldn't shield him anymore. Daniel took the statements, folded them carefully, and slipped them into his jacket pocket. "We'll go first thing tomorrow morning," he said quietly to me. I nodded, my heart racing. I had never felt so terrified, and yet so alive. Dinner ended without another word. Plates sat untouched, glasses half full. The silence followed us as Daniel and I walked out of the house together. The cool night air hit my face, and for the first time in weeks, I could breathe. But deep inside, I knew this was only the beginning. Ethan wouldn't let go quietly. My father's shame hung heavy in the air. The truth was out, yes, but justice hadn't been served yet. As Daniel drove me back to his apartment, where I would stay the night, I stared out the window at the city lights. My brother's smile was gone, but so was the illusion of family harmony I had clung to for so long. What came next would either break us apart forever or finally put things right. And though I didn't know which, I was ready to face it. That night at Daniel's apartment, I barely slept. The events of the dinner replayed in my head like a film on a loop. My father's silence, Ethan's shrinking smirk, and Daniel's firm voice echoing over the table. I kept thinking about the look on my father's face, confusion, shame, and something else I had never seen before, something close to fear. I had spent so many years waiting for him to acknowledge my efforts, my sacrifices, my place in this family. But when it mattered most, he had raised his hand against me instead of standing beside me. That hurt more deeply than I could ever put into words. When the morning came, Daniel drove me to the police station. My stomach churned the entire way. I kept my hands clenched in my lap, the bank statements pressed tightly between them. I kept telling myself this was the right thing, that it wasn't just about money anymore. It was about dignity, about drawing a line that couldn't be crossed again. Daniel squeezed my hand once as we walked through the doors, and that small gesture steadied me. Inside, we met with an officer, a woman with kind eyes who listened carefully as I explained what happened. My voice shook at first, but the more I spoke, the stronger it became. I laid the papers on the desk, showing the withdrawals, explaining how my card had gone missing, how Ethan had been the only one with access. The officer nodded, asking questions, writing notes, and when she finally said, "We can move forward with charges," I felt a rush of relief and fear all at once. Daniel signed his name as a witness, and I added mine to the report. The officer assured me they would handle it swiftly. When we walked out of the station, the sunlight felt sharper, almost blinding. The decision had been made, and now there was no turning back. Later that evening, back at my father's house, the tension was thick enough to choke on. Ethan was in his room, slamming drawers and muttering under his breath. Dad barely spoke to me, and when he did, his words were clipped, almost bitter. "You really had to go that far, Rachel?" he asked, his voice cold. "I didn't have a choice, Dad," I said quietly. "You wouldn't listen, and he wouldn't stop. I couldn't let him walk all over me again." His eyes narrowed, and for a moment I saw the man who had raised me, strong and stubborn, but I also saw his pride breaking. "He's still my son, and I'm your daughter," I whispered back. "But that didn't stop you from slapping me when I told the truth." He didn't reply. He just turned away, retreating into his silence, leaving me standing there with my chest tight and my eyes burning. The following day, the police came. I was in the kitchen when I heard the knock on the door, heavy and deliberate. Ethan must have known it was for him because he bolted from his room, his face pale and wild. When he saw the uniforms at the door, his voice cracked with panic. "This is insane. You can't do this to me." The officers stepped inside calmly, explaining the charges: fraud, theft, misuse of banking information. Ethan shouted, cursing at me, at Daniel, at the officers, at the world. He tried to shove one of them, but they were prepared. In moments, his hands were behind his back, cuffs clinking shut. I stood frozen, clutching the edge of the counter. Watching my brother being led out of the house was surreal. This was the boy I grew up with, the one I shared birthdays and Christmas mornings with, the one Dad always shielded from consequences. Now he was in handcuffs, his face twisted in rage and fear. He turned toward me as they guided him out the door, his voice spitting venom. "You'll regret this, Rachel. You think you've won, but you'll regret it." The door shut behind them, and silence fell again. My father sank into his chair, his hands gripping his knees so tightly his knuckles turned white. He didn't look at me, not once. For the first time, I realized he wasn't just ashamed of Ethan, he was ashamed of himself. Daniel stepped beside me, his hand on my shoulder. "You did the right thing," he said gently. "Don't let his words haunt you." But they did. That night, as I lay in bed, I kept hearing Ethan's voice in my head, sharp and angry, promising regret. I wondered if my father would ever forgive me, or if he would forever see me as the one who broke the illusion of family he clung to. In the days that followed, the house felt emptier, quieter. My father avoided me, barely speaking except for short answers. Sometimes I caught him staring at Ethan's empty chair at the table, his expression hollow. I wanted to reach out, to tell him I understood his pain, but I couldn't bring myself to. Not after everything. Daniel, on the other hand, was my rock. He checked in on me constantly, reminding me that I wasn't alone. We started focusing again on our future, our engagement, though it felt different now.
My view of family had changed.
I realized that the family you choose, the people who stand by you, sometimes matter more than the family you're born into. One evening, about a week after Ethan's arrest, I returned home from work to find Dad sitting in the dark living room. The TV was off, the house silent. He looked up at me, his eyes tired. "I never thought it would come to this," he said quietly. "Neither did I replied, my voice soft but firm. He sighed, leaning back in his chair. "I wanted to believe in him. Maybe I wanted it too much. And when you accused him, I didn't want to face the truth. It was easier to think you were wrong." I swallowed hard. "But I wasn't wrong. And instead of standing with me, you humiliated me." His gaze fell to the floor. "I can't take that back." "No, you can't," I said, feeling my throat tighten. "But maybe you can start by seeing me for who I really am. Not just the one who fixes things, not just the one you lean on, but your daughter, who deserves your trust." For a long time he said nothing. Then he nodded once, almost reluctantly, but it was something. That night, I cried in my room, silent tears soaking my pillow. They weren't just tears of pain. They were tears of release. The truth was finally out, the burden no longer mine alone. But even with Ethan gone, even with Daniel by my side, I knew the story wasn't finished. Because the damage inside our family ran deeper than stolen money. It was about loyalty, about blindness, about years of pretending. And I couldn't shake the feeling that the fallout was only just beginning. When the court date was finally set, I felt a mix of dread and relief. I had spent weeks replaying everything in my mind: the theft, the slap, the silence at dinner, Ethan's arrest. Now it was all leading here, to a courtroom where strangers would decide what punishment my brother deserved. I didn't want to see his face again, but I knew I had to. If I didn't stand firm now, everything I had endured would feel wasted. On the morning of the hearing, Daniel drove me downtown. The courthouse loomed tall, gray, and imposing against the sky. My stomach twisted, but Daniel squeezed my hand as we walked inside. "You're stronger than you think," he whispered. His faith in me was the only thing that kept me steady as we took our seats. Ethan was brought in wearing a plain jumpsuit, his wrists bound in cuffs. For a second, I hardly recognized him. His usual swagger was gone, replaced by a hollow expression. But when his eyes met mine, I saw the anger still burning there. He looked at me as though I had destroyed his life, never acknowledging that he had been the one to betray mine. My father sat a few rows behind me. He looked smaller than I remembered, his shoulders slumped, his face worn. When our eyes met, he gave a brief nod, but said nothing. It wasn't approval, not exactly, but maybe it was acceptance of the truth he had refused to see for so long. When it was my turn to speak, I rose slowly, clutching the papers I had carried since the beginning. My voice trembled at first, but I forced myself to look at the judge, not at Ethan. I explained how I had saved for months, how the money was meant for my engagement, how I had discovered the theft and gathered proof. I told them about confronting Ethan, about my father's disbelief, about the pain of being humiliated in my own home. I spoke about how betrayal isn't just about money, it's about trust, about the bond between family members being shattered. The courtroom was quiet as I spoke. My throat tightened, but I refused to cry. I wanted them to hear strength in my words, not weakness. When I finally finished, the judge nodded, thanking me, and I sat back down with Daniel's hand wrapped tightly around mine. Ethan's lawyer tried to paint him as a misguided young man, someone who made mistakes out of desperation. But the evidence was too clear. The withdrawals matched, the pattern undeniable. And when Ethan finally stood to speak, his words were filled with bitterness. "She wanted to ruin me," he said, glaring at me across the room. "She always acted like she was better than me. This was her chance to get rid of me, and she took it." The judge didn't flinch at his excuses. After reviewing everything, the sentence was announced: time in county jail and mandatory restitution for the money he had stolen. It wasn't forever, but it was enough to show that actions had consequences. For the first time in Ethan's life, He couldn't escape accountability. As they led him out of the courtroom, he turned to me one last time. His eyes were cold, his mouth twisted. He didn't say a word, but the look was enough. It carried the same promise he had made before, that I would regret this. But I didn't. Not anymore. Outside the courthouse, the cool air hit me like a wave. I felt drained, hollow, yet lighter somehow. Daniel wrapped his arms around me, whispering that it was over. My father walked past us slowly, his face pale. For a moment, I thought he would stop, that he might finally say the words I had been waiting years to hear. But he only glanced at me, his lips pressed tight, and kept walking. Watching him go hurt in a way I can't describe. I had exposed the truth, but in doing so, I had lost something else, the bond with the man who had raised me. The weeks that followed were quiet. Life moved on. I returned to my job, planning weddings and parties, though my own engagement celebration no longer felt like the dream it once was. Daniel and I talked about keeping it small, simple, focused on the people who truly loved us. I didn't care about fancy decorations anymore. I only cared about building a life with someone who stood by me when no one else would. At home, the distance between my father and me remained. We shared the same house, but it felt emptier than ever. Sometimes I caught him staring at Ethan's old room, the door closed and silent. Sometimes I saw him watching me quietly, as though he wanted to say something but couldn't. I stopped waiting for his words. I stopped expecting them. One evening, Daniel and I sat together on the porch, watching the city lights flicker in the distance. He asked me if I regretted it, turning in my brother, breaking the silence that had kept our family intact for so long. I thought about it carefully before answering. No, I said finally, because if I had stayed quiet, he would have done it again. Maybe to me, maybe to someone else. And Dad would have kept protecting him. It had to stop somewhere. Daniel nodded, pulling me close. Then you did the right thing. I believed him. Deep down, I knew he was right. But that didn't erase the ache I felt every time I remembered the slap, every time I replayed Ethan's words, every time I noticed the space growing wider between me and my father. My story isn't just about money. It's about betrayal, about blind favoritism that turned a father's love into a shield for his son's sins. It's about the courage it takes to stand up when no one believes you, the pain of being struck down by the very people who should lift you up, and the strength that comes from refusing to stay silent. Sometimes I wonder if Ethan will ever change, if the time in jail will teach him something, or if he will carry that anger forever. Sometimes I wonder if my father will ever truly forgive me, or if part of him will always see me as the daughter who exposed the truth he couldn't bear to face. But when those doubts creep in, I remind myself of one thing. I didn't do this to destroy my family. I did it to save myself, to reclaim my voice, my dignity, my right to be seen and believed. And as I sit here now, telling my story, I know this much. Betrayal may have broken me, but courage rebuilt me. Justice doesn't erase the scars, but it gives me the strength to move forward. I may have lost a brother, and perhaps even a father's full love, but I gained something more important, the knowledge that I can stand tall, even when the people closest to me turn away. That is the truth I carry. That is the ending of this chapter, and the beginning of a new one.